I'm going to talk to you guys about vision-led product management. And as I get started, why don't you first raise your hand if you use A/B testing? All right, just about everybody. That's good. All right, now keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. If you use A/B testing and you have a high degree of confidence in the outcomes that you see from the A/B test that you run. What? Actually, really? I'm surprised. This isn't a trick question. You can keep your hand up. It's OK. But raise your hand and keep it up if you have an equally high degree of confidence in what you should test next and why. Ooh, not a lot of hands that are still left, right? OK? And that's a little bit of a problem. And it's not really surprising because in doing A/B tests, they're really good at telling us what works and what doesn't work when we try two things side by side and keep everything else exactly constant. But they're really bad at telling us why something works. And the why is really critical for us as product managers because the why is what gives us direction. Now let's take another industry, like let's take the pharmaceuticals industry and say, what if they applied the same kind of approach that we apply of just kind of like experimenting with a few things here and there and just trying it out. So they want to cure some disease and they're like, we're going to round up all the sick people and we're going to divide them into like a 50-50 split randomly. And then there's this chemical that Joey, who works over in marketing, thinks is really cool. And we're going to inject people with that and just kind of see how it goes. We'll wait for statistical significance. Not so good. I don't really want to sign up for that clinical trial. I don't think you guys do either. And the reason I bring this up is because having a sense of directed innovation is really important, right? And I think a lot of times in product, which is both an art and a science, we've kind of like lost a little bit of the art component of that and kind of gone so far in the scientific direction that we haven't thought as much about why. And if you think about the pharmaceuticals industry and the medical space, they've done their research, right? They've done their homework to understand what they're working with, who their customer is, how a disease operates, all the way down to like a molecular level, right? It's kind of like amazing. But a lot of times we don't take the same kind of like time and energy and emphasis on research within product to have a similar kind of like point of view. Now, why is that important when we look at product management? While the life and death of our customers may not be on the line, although for some products it actually is, the life and death of our company actually is. And that's because we need to maintain a certain kind of growth rate to be effective. And you can kind of tell, like, look, you don't have to have even a product development team at all to grow your company. You could like send invoices a little bit faster. You could train your support team a little bit better. And that's kind of like the zone of operation, OK? But if you want to do more than that and you want to grow faster than that, then obviously that's why we're all here as product managers, is to try to make that happen with our product development teams. And so there's a lot of work that we can do to drive that forward. But the same way that the operators are constrained because they're just working with the product that they're working with, even with all the bugs and the UX issues and things like that that they may have. At the same time, they can't really change the product. And what we sometimes do as product managers, and what I see a lot of companies doing that I've worked with, is they tend to focus their time on this zone of optimization, right? So they're kind of like improving the way that the product works. We're going to try a one-step sign-up flow instead of a two-step sign-up flow, or we'll say yes to that one-off customer request this one time just to kind of like close that next deal that I want to get in the door. And that's basically a way of optimizing the growth rate of your business subject to a constraint, which is the value proposition that you're delivering to your customer, right? And if we want to really be truly innovators and we want to actually drive these higher growth rates, then the way to do that is to focus on innovation. And I'm going to define innovation as driving up the value that you deliver to your customer, not just sort of eking more out of it given what it already is. And some people might say, well, can't I just like optimize my way into innovation? And the answer is like, yes, you totally can, okay? And like the whole process of evolution is a really good example of this, right? You start with like an amoeba or something, and then generations go by, and there's always like little tweaks that kind of happen over time, and you got like the survival of the fittest and all that, and then boom, like rainbow lizard, right? Things can happen, things are great. There's only one small problem with this whole process if we try to apply it as product managers. Raise your hand if you work at a startup. Startup like, I'm just going to say like, you're dependent on outside funding to like keep you guys going, okay? Keep your hand up if you have at least 1 year of runway before you run out of money. Keep your hand up if you have 2 years before you run out of money. Keep your hand up if you have 100 million years before you run out of money, right? Okay, well that's why we don't necessarily want to apply this approach ourselves. And it kind of calls into question, let's pause for a second. Like, what's the true role of product management? Like, why do we exist? Why do we do what we do? It's often very much misunderstood. It's very misunderstood by my parents. You guys ever have that conversation where you're like, here's what I do as a product manager. And they're like, oh, so you're like a developer? You're like, well, no, like I tell, and you eventually sound like that guy from Office Space, you know, where he's like, I take the specifications from the customer and I give them to the engineers, right? That's not the role of product, that's the role of bad product, okay? What's the role of good product? And there are people, probably even people in this room, who think that the role of product management is to make it possible or to help marketing to hit their numbers this month, or that their role of product management is to help sales meet their quotas this quarter. And that's not the role of product management, okay? I'm gonna put my foot down on this. This is not what we do. We don't help them to hit numbers that they're already supposed to be able to attain, all right? What we do is we make it possible for those teams to sign up for numbers 1, 2 years down the road that otherwise would have been completely impossible today. That's the role of product management, right? And it's really important to kind of like keep that in mind as we think about what we do next within our products. And as we think about that, there's a reason that I said 1 or 2 years out, okay? It's not just about doing it next week or next month. Even though we're working in agile sprints and 2-week delivery cycles and things like that, the time frame that you pay attention to and the time frame that you're sort of like concentrating on for delivering results dictates the strategy that you use to get there, right? Now, you guys work on a bunch of different kinds of products. So big company, small company, consumer, mobile, enterprise, and so on, okay? But we're all very probably familiar with like losing weight and what that whole process looks like. I certainly am. That's why I wear black slimming pants when I'm on stage. If I wanted to lose the maximum amount of weight that I could tomorrow, what would I do? Well, I could actually just not drink water. I could just become really dehydrated. You know, you can lose like 4 pounds in a day by doing that. It's not very good. This is not medical advice. I'm not recommending that, okay? But if I had 2 weeks or 3 weeks, well then my whole way of thinking about that's gonna be different. If I didn't drink water for 2 weeks, I'd be dead, right? So I've got to look in a different way for how I go about making that happen. And I look at magazine and try to, you know, figure out what the next like fad diet is and try that. But if I gave myself 8 months and I said, I just want to have the beach body that I've always wanted by the time it gets to June 2020, well, then I would actually start to take a very different approach again. And I might clear my calendar and go to the gym and actually exercise and pay attention to what I eat. In fact, I might even take a very opposite approach by drinking water more before every meal. So the strategy that I use, depending on the time frame that I'm looking at, even for accomplishing the exact same goal, which in our case often is going to be growth. You know, I really like what Shelly said earlier about there's no such thing as a growth PM. Like, what are the non-growth PMs doing, right? So the strategy that we use is going to be dependent on the time frame that we pay attention to. This is a really important point. I've done a lot of advisory work in the last few years. In fact, I've had the pleasure of being like an advisor to about 40 or 50 companies. And I've basically been at this whiteboard like a bunch of times. And because the time frame matters, I then ask the entrepreneur, the sort of founder, CEO, hey, in the beginning of this engagement, why don't you walk me through where you guys are headed? Like, show me your vision for where you're going to be. And this is where they get really excited, right? You give like a founder, CEO, a whiteboard and a pen, and they just go nuts, right? And so they draft all these things out there, and they're like, oh, you know, we're going to revolutionize this industry, and we're going to use AI and ML to do all these crazy things, and then we're going to become the Uber of blah, 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 right? And I hear these kinds of stories, and they're cool, like they sound really interesting, but at the end, they're like super excited, like, you want to give me like a high five, and I'm like, this is where I'm trying to be polite. And it's just because it feels like this to me. And if you guys have ever like seen this old South Park episode, it's actually produced in 1998 before the whole .com bubble burst. But it's totally true, right? It was true for companies back then, but here's the thing, right? To get really serious, it's true today just as much as it was back then. And the part that's missing, that was missing then and is still missing today, is the customer, right? The one word that I never hear in those whiteboard presentations is the word customer. Here's what we're actually going to do. You're going to revolutionize an industry. Well, you don't revolutionize an industry directly. You revolutionize an industry because you solve a real customer problem. And in so doing, you revolutionize an industry, right? So it's really important that we as product managers keep that in mind and really think about this as we try to generate a customer-centric vision. Now, we've talked about some of the things that are really important in generating, as we've kind of gone through this. And as you generate a vision, these are all the things that have to come together. You want to think longer term. You want to understand who your customer is. You want to solve a real problem for your customers. You don't want to take this kind of short-sighted approach, right, that a lot of times we have a tendency to do because we bring this on ourselves, right? Yes, we get a lot of pressure from CEOs and boards and things like that to deliver results. But the other thing that we get a lot of pressure on is from our own lean and agile and fail fast mentality, that if it doesn't deliver something right away, then it must not be the right thing to do. And I think we need to counterbalance that with a vision and a strategy for where we're going to be headed next. So I've done a lot of hand waving and talking on stage. What actually is a vision and a strategy? Let's call attention to this real quick. So a vision to me is like I'm standing at point A right now, and a vision is me coming like somewhere else, this is about as fast as I can run, and getting to point B and saying, that's where I'm going to plant a flag. And that's where we're going. This is the flag that I'm planting, not only for where our company is going to be, but what the customer experience is going to be when we get there. It doesn't mean every little UX design and things like that, but at a high level, I've got to provide that clarity for everybody else who's around me, whether they're engineers, whether they're people in marketing or sales, or the CEO even, right? This is where we're going, guys. That's what a vision is all about. And the strategy that you take is just the path that you take from point A to point B. And I may have walked it in a straight line, but it's never really a straight line, right? Like you take these different kinds of like diversions because you're trying to avoid, landmines, or you're trying to make sure that you arrive at certain kind of like pit stops as you go through. So you kind of like, take these different steps along the way, and your roadmap becomes simply the path that you're going to take, the rough outline for how you're going to go from point A to the first step in that product strategy that helps you to arrive at a vision. So a lot of people kind of get confused about what's the purpose of a roadmap. And so basically say, hey, look, I've got a plan to make this whole vision a reality. Here's what I can do to make this whole thing work. And you get people on board with that. Now, it's not to say that that's the only kind of work that we do. Obviously, there's technical debt work that we need to get taken care of. There are improvements. There's bug fixes. There are some optimizations that we need to do for our business as well. And those are all fine, right? But it's got to be sort of in conjunction with and hopefully in the same direction as the vision that you're trying to take everybody. Now, I see this kind of thing happen a lot when it comes to roadmaps. Anybody had that situation where you like work really hard on a roadmap and you share it with the company and everybody's like, I don't know. I don't know. I should ask the question the other way. Anybody not had that experience? Because come find me, that would be great. But the reason that it often happens, in my experience, is because it's never actually an argument about what feature should go before what feature and things like that on the roadmap. It's an actual upstream argument, or usually a disconnect or a lack of clarity around what the vision is that you're actually headed towards, or what the strategy and the path is that you guys want to take as a company to get there. And it shows up in the roadmap because the work hasn't been done to actually document the vision, and the work hasn't been done to document the strategy. So I want to take the second half of this talk and kind of walk you through what does a good product vision document actually look like. And so get a little bit away from the hand waving and tell you a few more stories and specific examples of things that you can include in a good product vision document that's going to help you to be successful at setting the direction and the course and really leading in product management when you get back to your companies next week. So 5 things. The first one is just a problem statement and a target market. What are you doing and who are you doing it for? Really straightforward, okay? Number 2, customer outcomes that you're going to deliver and success metrics that you'll provide to them along the way. What's the user journey, and are there any gaps that you have in your product today? Finally, getting into differentiation and some design principles that you're going to adhere to as you take these steps. And then lastly, and this is important that it's actually last, is your own growth and monetization that stems as a function of what you're doing for your customers. So we're going to go through each one of these 5 components like one at a time. First one is problem before solution. Now there's a ton of stuff that I can include. We could probably be here for 3 hours talking about what kinds of things go into a vision document. I don't want to do that. I'm sure the people with the lightning talks wouldn't be so happy about that. What I'll do is just kind of give you like 1 or 2 little tidbits for each of these things. And then at the end, I'll actually share with you a template that you can use when you go back to the office that you can download, and you can actually use that, and it has a lot more detail that are kind of like beyond the things that I talk about today. So the first one is problem before solution. And I see a lot of companies think about, my vision is I'm going to get to $50 million ARR. Like, that's not a vision. Come on, that's not like anything for your customer. Or my vision is we're going to revolutionize this industry. No, like what is the actual problem that an actual potential customer of yours is facing today. Why do they need to solve it now? And forget about you. This has nothing to do with you, right? This is about what you exclude, is the beginning of your vision document, okay? It's about what your customer is looking for and why what they have today isn't good enough. One of the best examples of this is from one of the most successful advertising campaigns of all time, which was for the original Apple iPod. Obviously really helped to launch the company. And there was a ton of stuff that's in the iPod, right? It was like, you know, this much storage, and it could hold this many songs, and the playback, and if you drop it, then it has all this shock absorption, and they didn't talk about any of that stuff, right? What people wanted to do is they just wanted to like rock out, and rock out freely. And they described that very elegantly with a lot of the marketing communications that they had. So what is it that your customers want? Forget about yourself for a moment and put yourself in their shoes, right? That's actually the very first thing that you can do right in a vision document. The second thing is by having a focus and an emphasis on customer outcomes that you're going to deliver. A lot of companies, again, kind of focus on their own internal metrics rather than looking from the outside in about how a customer would actually measure the value that they derive from your product. And there are two things that are really important about this. One of them is that in your vision, it should be from your customer's point of view. And the second one is it really needs to be bold, okay? This is about getting 10x kind of outcomes. Imagine if Netflix was just sort of thinking about, how do I make it like 5% more efficient for you to get the DVDs that you're like, you know, getting? And they did that the last 15 years. They wouldn't be anywhere near where they are today because they had a vision for a better kind of customer outcome, right? Which is instantaneous, rather than waiting like 1 day or 23 hours or 22 hours to receive your DVDs. Think about it completely differently. Same kind of thing with Amazon and books and the Kindle, right? So helping to drive your strategy and to drive your vision is providing clarity as to what a 10x outcome looks like for your customer as they would measure it, not as you would. And I'm going to give you an example from eBay. Now, I was fortunate enough to be there from 01 to 05 as a product manager. It was kind of like eBay's heyday. I worked on Marty Kagan's team, learned a ton. It was really a fantastic experience, but we didn't do everything right either. And from the period of like 03 or so, I was working on the finding team. And finding is like helping customers like just find the stuff that they're looking for. I don't know, it's pretty straightforward, right? But not really. And so we were always debating about what we could do to make the user's experience as good as possible. And one of the things that we had as an internal metric that kind of made sense when we thought about it internally was when they're on the search results page, a good success measure is like, do they actually click then to item pages? Because if they don't click to item pages when they're on search results, then that means that we're not actually like merchandising our stuff. We're not really like showing them the items that perhaps they're looking for. Or maybe they landed on a search result page where nothing actually looks like the kind of product that they actually want, in which case we kind of like failed with finding. And so we measured that particular metric, the number of view item pages that happened divided by the number of search results pages that were displayed. And that was like a core metric for us. But that was still internally driven. If I asked a customer who's trying to find something how they would measure it, they wouldn't say, I'm going to look at the number of item clicks that I make along the way, right? What they're going to say is, I have an idea in my head of what I want to buy. How long does it take me to get there? That's what I want to like focus on. How simple was it for me to actually get to the stuff that I wanted to find? And had we taken that approach, we would have made some very different decisions. And to put this in perspective, the decision that we were making at the time was to not show shipping costs on eBay items. And that seems like kind of on the search results page. So we'd show it on the item page. But if you clicked on search results, you wouldn't see it. You'd see the price. Now, sellers knew this. So what did they do, right? List an item for a penny that's actually worth $10 and then charge you $20 on shipping. But now let's look at the buyer experience. So they see that the items there sold for 1 penny. Then they click on it. They click on the item page. We think that we drove a success because they hit the item, and it drove up that metric that I was talking about. But it's actually a terrible outcome for the buyer because they're just disappointed as soon as they get to the product and see that it's $20 shipping. So this whole thing sucks. I'm going to go to Amazon, which is exactly what happened. Okay? And we lost a ton of loyal customers because we refused, because we didn't understand it ourselves, what the real buyer kind of like success measure actually was. And we used our own internal metric instead, and it held us back. We didn't add the shipping cost to search results page for years. We knew we could do it, but we decided not to. All right, and here's what the impact of this is. These impacts of paying attention to your own internal metrics instead of to your customers' metrics and looking at things the way they would see them can be really heavily magnified, okay? In the next 3 years after this, after we had made these types of decisions, and it wasn't just based on this alone, but it was based on several, but they were all kind of like along the same lines. The Amazon stock price went up 2.5x from 2005 to 2008. During that same window, the eBay stock price went down 60%. Okay, and that was before the 2008 financial crisis, when it went down another 50% after that. Okay, so if anybody in the audience was holding eBay stock in 2005, sorry. Yeah, so don't throw tomatoes at me. Okay, but if you held Amazon stock in 2005, come find me afterwards, because the way I see it, you owe me a beer. So that's a good B2C example of this and why it's important. Let's look at like a B2B kind of like case study as well. And there's a lot of different kinds of companies. This is just a little bit more theoretical. But it's almost always the case that in a B2B business, your customer's success metric is some sort of flavor of like ROI, like how much value are they deriving from your product divided by how much they're paying for it. Now keep one thing in mind. What they are paying for your product is your revenue, okay? Now this is really an important point because your revenue is often the denominator of your customer's value metric. And as your revenue goes up, your product gets worse for them, right? So revenue per account going up, their ROI goes down. So I've seen a lot of companies are like, oh, this is really good. You know, we had a great year last year. We increased our customers' value by 10%, and our revenue went up by 30%. I'm like, that's terrible, actually, right? Like, you don't want that to be the case. So you want to monitor and actually track your customer's success metric. Now, when I was at a company called O-Power, we did this. O-Power is a company that sold an enterprise SaaS solutions to utilities to help them drive kilowatt-hour savings by sending these reports to people's homes. You guys may actually get these, where it like comes from Con Ed or something like that, and it says, here's your energy use compared to that of like, you know, similar homes. And in doing this, we knew that the utility that we were selling to, that their success metric was kilowatt-hours per dollar spent. And that's it. That's all that they cared about. And so we couldn't just raise the prices on our product without also raising the efficacy of our programs. All right? And this, we tracked that metric just as religiously as we tracked the dollars that we made in terms of like ARR growth. And I think that really propelled us to being the kind of company that was really successful and ended up with a $1 billion exit. So really good kind of like case study, I think, there from product. Obviously a case from my own career where I kind of like failed, and a case from my career where I think we were able to get it right. Third, understanding the whole user journey, right? And this is not just about understanding your user journey as it stands today. That's what you got a research team for. And that's the kind of stuff that they do, right? Is they can go interview customers and they can learn about what they, you know, what they're liking and not liking about the current experience and kind of build like a journey map. That's all related to the product as it stands today. If you have a 10x outcome that you're trying to get, you have to reimagine what that customer journey is actually going to look like at that time. And it's really important to do so. And then what you can do is you can backtrack from that and say, okay, if that's the customer journey that I want it to be down the road, then what are all the things that are missing from my product today that I need to go build? There's your product strategy. Now, you still have to figure out the order in which you're going to do these things and the sequence of the changes that you're going to make. But basically, that's kind of like the strategy that you can use. Now, I'm the chief product officer at a company called GoCanvas. This is actually our customer journey for the future. And it doesn't have to be really complicated or detailed, although, you know, I have a lot of detail behind this as well. But for the sake of communicating it to other people within the company, we reduced it all the way down to like a comic strip. And it's just something that fits on one page. You can do something similar by just kind of going to the whiteboard and figuring this out, take a picture, and share it with everybody. But the reason this is important, let's go back to like that Netflix example. What if Netflix hadn't thought of that ahead of time, right? If they just sort of said, okay, we're going to go from DVD shipping to streaming. Okay, that's it. Well, how does that change things, right? Okay, well, if I had to have a TV and a DVD player to watch anything from Netflix before, that's no longer the case. And now suddenly, I have this sort of plethora of devices that I need to be able to support on. So now I got the strategic decision do I make? Do I build a Netflix box, or do I embed my software into other devices that customers already have? Well, the distribution strategy of getting your software into other devices is better, but that takes them down the path of partnerships. And then you start to think about the customer experience there, which is like, I go to Apple TV and I see the Netflix like logo, and I can go click on that, that's great, but what's to prevent Apple TV from putting other logos on there, like Amazon or Hulu or anything else, right? So how am I gonna like differentiate versus everybody else? Original content, right? So these pieces all kind of like fit together when you think about the future customer journey. But if you don't think about the journey and you just think about the 10x outcome without the details, that's where that vagueness can kill you and manifest as a bunch of unwarranted and sort of like honestly unhealthy debates about where your product roadmap is headed. So that's the kind of stuff that you want to get out of the way in the first place. That can be really helpful. Fourth, design principles that differentiate you. Okay? Design principles kind of keep you on track as you go through. And one of my favorite products is like the Swiss Army knife. I think it's really cool. I love all the gadgets. I'm a product person, so like, yes, it's great. I like the versatility of it, right? Versatility is obviously one of the core sort of like fundamental tenets of what makes a Swiss Army knife a Swiss Army knife. And if I wanted to be a good product manager, right, what would I do if I wanted to improve the Swiss Army knife? Well, I'd go watch it getting used in the field, right? And it's like I'd go like to REI, and I'd go buy some binoculars, and then I'd go set up like a tent next to somebody else who's camping, and I just kind of like watch them. And very creepy, but I would watch, I'd be like, hey, what are you using your Swiss Army knife to do? What are the things you're doing while you're camping that you're not using your Swiss Army knife for that you could potentially be if I added the right next thing? And so I might watch people trying to break twigs in half. I'm like, oh, I should add a saw, right? Or I might watch them get lost at the intersection of two paths and then say, hey, we should add a compass to this thing. And I could add a pair of scissors and nail clippers and the list goes on, right? And eventually what would I end up with? Is a Swiss Army knife that's like 1.5 feet wide. And is that actually a better product? Well, each individual step that I take seems like it's a better product, right? Because I'm helping to solve something that I wasn't otherwise solving. This is why design principles are so important to state and to share with the rest of the company, is because it helps you to make sure that you don't get like way off track, which you can totally have in this case. Now, if I think about versatility as being the fundamental design principle of a Swiss Army knife, well, that's nice. Like, that sort of like works. It's helpful. But that's not the only principle. Because if I compare it to a toolbox is actually even more versatile than a Swiss Army knife. That was never actually the thing in the first place. What made a Swiss Army knife like amazing and such a great product was not its versatility, even though that's what we all think about. It was the fact that it's ergonomic, that it's small, compact, fits in your pocket, that it's safe to use, right? How safe is it to cut a peach with like 1.5 feet long, Swiss Army knife? It's not, right? So it starts to violate its own design principles. Now, this is obvious when it comes to physical products. I could look at that thing and be like, where do I even put it? This thing is stupid. But with software, it's really hard to detect. We have this kind of thing happen a lot as product managers, where we keep adding feature after feature after feature and not thinking about what the impact of that is to the first-time user experience of somebody who's just trying to get onboarded and even understand what the hell you do in the first. A good example of design principles that help to actually differentiate. I have like a no bullshit rule when it comes to design principles, which is that if you write a design principle like make it easy to use, and my response would be no shit, then don't do that. That's a bad design principle. Okay, that's like not really helpful for anybody because it's too obvious, right? You want to focus on those things that actually are the key differentiators of your product. And if I go back to that O-Power example of what we do to try to help people to save energy in their households, here's the thing. The utility buys it, but it's the consumer experience that they just get. You show up to your mailbox one day and get a home energy report from O-Power that you never asked for. Right? And so the design principle that was really important to emphasize on that was this assumption that people don't care. Right? People spend 9 minutes a year thinking about their energy use, and therefore, as stated here, we have to accept the burden of relevance. Okay? So if you want to see a really good example of a set of design principles that kind of lean into both the positives and the negatives about a product, go to ux.opower.com. They're actually published broadly, and you can see those there. Really kind of like best-in-class stuff. All right, last part, sustainable growth and healthy monetization. All right, I kind of leave this for last because ideally, your whole monetization strategy is about aligning with your customers, right? If their value proposition continues to go up, then I want to make more money as their value proposition goes up as well. I don't want to over-monetize my product by charging more than the value that I'm actually delivering in certain cases, and then drastically undercharging in others. It's all about alignment to get these things right. Now, this is where there's probably a little bit less depth for me to be able to share with you today about that alignment, because it really depends on the nature of your product and stuff like that. But we'll just suffice it to say this, which is as product managers, you've got to always remember that the ultimate trailing indicator of success is the financial outcomes that you get. Revenue is critical. It's important. The financials are essential. But it's the trailing indicator that you've actually done the right stuff. Okay? We talked about a lot of stuff. Monday comes up. What can you do on Monday next week to put these kinds of things in practice, all right? First of all, I hope that you guys actually feel really empowered as product managers, right? Like, you own the customer journey. You own the experience. You own the why behind these things, right? Go take the bull by the horns and go assert your role as product managers to drive the kind of growth that you're supposed to drive. Don't just be merely reactive. Number 2, write down your product vision, okay? I said I would provide you a template. There it is. You can go to a website for the advisory practice that I created a while back called Prodify.group/NYPC. And on there, you can actually find a Google Doc that gives you like kind of a template of a bunch of different things that you can fill out. You don't have to like have the whole thing done, but it's okay to start small. But I would just encourage you guys to write some stuff down. And then lastly, collaborate. Interview your customers, make sure you're talking to them. During the conference today, talk to one another. Don't just ask about, oh, it was really cold last night, wasn't it? Like, yes, okay. But like, what about product stuff, guys? Like, you know, do you have design principles? How have they been working for you, et cetera? Talk about these kinds of things while you're at the conference today and talk with your peers. See if you get a chance to find me or the guy who has taken over the advisory practice that I created is Rajesh Nurlikar. He was a thought leader for me. You can't do this kind of stuff alone, and I couldn't do this alone either. So I wanted to have a special shout out to him for his contributions to helping me with this content. And I wanted to thank you guys very much for listening to me jabber on.